As you know, we have two topics today from the work of Hannah Arendt. We discussed her a little bit last time, but this time we continue with those two topics of natality. It's a sort of a key word now for Hannah Arendt. And the other topic is 3 volumes that she wrote towards the end of her life about the life of the mind, the inner life of the mind. So in order to get into the first topic, natality, we briefly recall what we said about the book Human Condition. The book Human Condition mentions 3 fundamental activities of human beings. These are labor, work, and action. The labor part, easy to understand. It's the sustenance of our physical existence. This is an effort, never ending, that we share with all animals. Even plants, potentially, when you think of large forests. So it is a fight to survive, and it leaves little for room for thinking. And the other basic activity is work. She calls it the work of Homo faber. Homo faber is the human being that creates a certain separation from nature in order to control nature to an extent, but also make it more habitable for the human condition by inventing consumer goods, starting with tools, and going on in a variety of ways. We are now practically in a situation where Homo faber almost replaces many items that were normally handled by nature. As we think of AI, we think of virtual reality, we think of all these new technology devices. All that is part of Homo faber, but also part of Homo faber is to setting up government, setting up the social order, political order, all these things that need to be done for what we now roughly call a civilization. And now comes the third, and this is as we enter our new topic, the third activity, she calls it action. It's a very peculiar kind of action. First of all, action takes place in a political community among equals. You have to recall here the world is a stage for Hannah Arendt. And everyone on that stage at any one particular moment is equal, but also absolutely unique. So she combines those 2 features and saying that action consists to be among equals and to be free, to speak freely, and even in such a way that what you are saying in this kind of setting is not tied to the necessities of life or even to, let's say, whatever is useful. So it is transcending all the functions that we normally associate with achieving something, making something, creating something. So that is a very interesting, I think, perspective here, which we will try to understand more closely, because when you are on that world stage among equals, and there are, as many people as there are at any one moment on the earth, and you perform, in other words, what you do is you, through speech and writing, you illustrate the meaning of human existence. When you do that in a public space, that is the basic reality of what it means to be truly human. And again, I think it's sort of, I don't want to say shocking, but at least kind of you reflect on it and say, how come? I mean, most people think they are most authentic, most themselves, most really the way they think of themselves are really among friends, families, in the private sphere. And that is not the case for Hannah Arendt. The private happiness, the private fulfillment, the private kind of life, it's only a shadowy experience. What really counts, the reality in your life, is your public persona. And I hope I make myself clear, but because that contrast is really for many people, very difficult to understand. Why it is precisely out there on the world stage where you practice your freedom, and it's the freedom really from the necessities of life, and testifying to the world what it truly means to be human, and count this as the reality of your life. And so I want to go a little bit more deeply into that. It's a freedom to appear in public. As a member, as I said, of the political community worldwide, it includes everybody in the world. And it is after setting an unexpected new beginning. And that's now a key word, beginning. Because what natality is really setting a new beginning. And in order to...
Eugen,
yeah?
May I ask a question in between? When does the public space begin and the private space end?
Well, they are concurrent. What I mean by that is that the public space is, as you grow older, naturally developing. I mean, you obviously, like every development scheme, you are first a child and then grow into a young adult. So you only reach the level of say, the public life at a certain stage of your development as a human being. But once it is there, those two things are concurrent. You have your private life, like very practically speaking. In the morning, Charlotte is driving to work, leaving her private sphere. And at work, she composes an essay on the major values of the new institute. If that is going public, Charlotte has been on the world stage here. And does that make sense to you, Charlotte?
Yes, it does make sense.
That makes sense? Good.
Yes, perfect. Thanks.
Good. So now, we need a few examples of what Hannah Arendt had in mind when she was speaking about the presentation on the world stage of people who are setting new beginnings. Some of the, she has many, many examples. I will just mention a few. The first one that comes to my mind is the example of Jesus. Certainly, he set an absolutely new beginning in the world, and she has been lifelong fascinated with the life of Jesus. But then also very different personalities. She has selected, for instance, Rosa Luxemburg as an example of how on a world stage you create totally new, surprising beginnings. Now, in the two examples I mentioned, the outcome of those performances is not very happy because they were both murdered, both Jesus and Rosa Luxemburg. But there are other examples that are more happy examples, like Goethe. She thought had set a new beginning. The Gottlob Lessing, main figure of the Enlightenment, She liked that a lot, and actually she credits much of the German Enlightenment with a person of Lessing. She likes also, in terms of Russian literature, the Grand Inquisitor from Brother Karamazov, and another figure that she liked was Robespierre in the French Revolution. She didn't like the violence of the French Revolution, but she liked this individual figure of Robespierre. You may have, again, an image of what she has in mind here, and the question then becomes, what does she really want to do with this action model? I think what she wants to do is she wants to create a setting for natality. Natality can be defined as the setting of a new beginning in a worldwide political community among equals and among others who also set new beginnings. So you can imagine that wherever you are in public, first of all, you speak your mind, you're free to do so. But what you speak about is, again, not what we usually call creating structures or creating new things. This is all under the second activity of making. What she wants to achieve in what she calls action in the setting for natality is the expression of human existence and what it means. So again, there is a very peculiar reduction of what she has in mind when she talks about political goals. These political goals, again, are not political goals in the common sense where you set up political structures and do things. No. These political goals are examples of how you set a new beginning in a twofold way. One, in a way which is sort of in common with what many people do when they create something in the public spheres. And the other one is absolutely unique to you, because she thought you could not replace any human being. And she said that with every human being coming into this world, there is an entirely new hope, a new faith entering. Now imagine, nowadays we have about 360,000 people entering this world, the world stage, every day. And it was a great impetus for Hannah Arendt to put that right at the center. In the background is a little bit her discussion with Heidegger, who characterized to be truly human would be to be ein Sein zum Tode, which means existing towards the authenticity that only an awareness of death can bring you. So Hannah Arendt wanted to set a counter position there, and she chose birth, in other words, the new beginnings, natality, as the main focus of human existence. So you sense there a little rivalry between Heidegger and his student at first, but it's definitely in the background here. What is the center for Hannah Arendt of truly human existence? And there are really two influences on her, how she gets at natality. The first huge influence is Nietzsche. Because remember when we talked about the metamorphosis of human life, the third period is the period of the child. Because the child, why, sets new beginnings, is not hampered by old memories, etc. Or even when later on she studies old memories, she sets them in a new light. So it's also the notion that at the heart of human existence is not the making. At the heart of the human existence is the celebrating of human freedom, and to expect that always something unexpected and unique might happen. So while the first influence on her is Nietzsche, the second influence is Augustine, Saint Augustine, because she, as you remember, she wrote her dissertation with Karl Jaspers in 1929, and when on the concept of love. And when she talks about evolution in the geological sense, she says that with the adventure of a human being, there was an absolutely new beginning. Now, the religious text about the human being entering the world evolution is, of course, the Bible. And so she sort of is fed by biblical consideration that there is a moment in human evolution where the human appears. And when the human appears, guess what appears? Freedom for the first time. And now, how that appears is remarkable, because at the same time, Hannah Arendt emphasizes that to have a planet like we have, the planet Earth, it's I cannot even name the number of improbabilities that this actually happens. Now people are looking for other stars and other planets. Maybe they found, but it's just highly improbable. As you look into the stars with the eyes of modern astronomy, what we have here in this system of the sun, a planet where we can freely breathe, plants, blue skies, etc. Now, when it comes to life, again, highly improbable that in the human evolution, anything like life could appear. If you ask modern biologists what it is, where life is coming from, well, they can spell out all the sort of ingredient, what it takes to be life, but they say it's a really highly improbable that it could exist. And so what Hannah Arendt does, she assimilates the same thing for the human being. The fact that a human being exists that has freedom, a being that is not tied by natural laws and instinct, all of that. For Hannah Arendt, this was highly improbable. But once that setting was set, once you have a human being with freedom, the entire situation, talking about a new beginning, changes. And so for her then, this notion that natality is important in the sense of coming forth all of these surprises, both on the macro scene and also on the little political scene of human affairs, and even in the little private scene of private lives. So by the time she wrote The Human Condition in 1958, natality had become the main notion for her to work on. And the two, as we now go into showing a little bit more the ramifications of this, there are two aspects to natality. One, the aspect of a radical, free, totally inclusive democracy or political structure that gives you certain rights, among other people who have the same rights. And the other one, the uniqueness of each individual, marked by each individual's birth, that you never know what happens, you never know what occurs. I want briefly to stop here to ask questions, for you to ask questions about this. I will go next into some of the ramification of natality. Is what I said so far clear?
Yes, I don't have other questions.
Yeah. Okay. Then, so what is the impact of natality? For Hannah Arendt, it was very clear. It was to create a sense of faith and hope. And again, I talked about the juxtaposition between living towards death and living towards birth, or living for birth. For her, she said that at a certain point in her life, it was unavoidable that she needed something that could give her faith and hope. And she said, it is exactly what we already know from evolution, also in our world of human affairs. It is the surprises that counts. And so she took the Heraclitus notion, expect the unexpected, on an entirely new practical level, which means that also applies to our lives, by the way. So expect the unexpected. Where? Well, out there in the world at large, but also inside of you. And this notion of faith and of surprise have been illustrated recently, to my surprise, in ways which really exemplifies nicely what Hannah Arendt thinks of natality. You know that in the last 4 weeks, we have, the entire world actually has witnessed an astounding example of what Hannah Arendt means by natality. And it is the anger that was unleashed by the assassination of George Floyd, and like waves carried itself over into Black Lives Matter, and all of the movement. It was a global, as you recall, still existing now. That is a natality in Arendt's sense, but it was all triggered by a teenager. The date is May 25th. It's about 8 p.m. in the evening. There is this high school student. Her name is Darnella Frazier, 17 years old. She is walking with her cousin toward a store, and suddenly she sees how a black man is killed under the knee of a police officer. Spontaneously, the 17-year-old grabs her iPhone, and during around 10 minutes, with a steady hand, photographs this killing from beginning to end. And she goes home and posts this the video at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then hell breaks loose. So, what is so characteristic about this event is that Hannah Arendt says that this young woman, 17-year-old, is creating, in a sense, unleashing something of a global movement, but she's not the author of it. How come? And in order to explain that, I'm going to a few remarks here, but it's very typical that I haven't found a politician, contemporary one, or a philosopher, who would have analyzed that event with that perspicuity as Hannah Arendt analyzes it 60 years ago. And I'm going to read something now from Hannah Arendt. And I want you to keep in mind the 70-year-old young woman who creates spontaneously that video, and how Hannah Arendt maintains that although this video was a performance of this young woman in the public arena of setting a new beginning, she's not the author of it. That's a very interesting position. So, what happens? I'm going to read what Hannah Arendt writes. It's almost like if she could sense something that was transpiring here, that was happening in Minneapolis. Here it is. The setting of a new beginning through action always fall into an already existing web of human relations. The stories may be recorded and tell us about who recorded it, but this agent is not the author of what followed the recording. This has baffled Plato and contributed to the contempt in which philosophers since Plato have held the realm of human affairs. The perplexity is that in any series of events that together form a story with a unique meaning, we can at least isolate the agent who set the whole process into motion. And although this agent frequently remains the subject, the hero or heroine of the story, we never can point unequivocally to her and say, she's the author of what followed. How is that possible? Hannah Arendt thinks that there is no causal relationship between the video that Darnella Fraser took and what happened afterwards. So if it's not a causal relationship, what kind of relationship is it? Well, now this is a surprise. The relationship of natality. Could you explain that a little bit more, natality? Well, there is always a gap between a story and the reality that underlies the story. And this the reality is always totally unpredictable. And this is why it cannot be put in the framework of causal relationship. In other words, it is, in other words, what Hannah Arendt characterizes as a totally surprising effect. Certain performances we perform can produce in the world over which we have no control, that we haven't authored in any kind of authorship, but they're authoring themselves as surprises that cannot be categorized. There is no linear logic. Okay, so the young girl, the young woman creates the video, and then look what happens. Cause effect one, effect two. No, absolutely no, because what happens, nobody can foresee, and even afterwards, there is no. You cannot reconstruct a causality scheme. It is, in other words, the characterizing what Hannah Arendt says. She strongly believed in it. The surprising event of the uniqueness of natality. When it happens, it happens. So applied to our own lives, it may mean, Natality, that we write our stories, we think our stories, we live our stories. We write our stories as biography, autobiography. And we certainly are the heroes or heroines of that script, but that's not us. That's not where the reality lies. It's good that we think a certain meaningfulness in our, but that's exactly pointing again to some difficult point to understand. It is not our private lives that really convey the reality of what is taking place. It is the public life. In other words, our little biography, or little or big, whatever it is set into a pre-existing and always existing infinite web of human relationships, on the top of which this particular story is just swimming, so that the true reality of who we are never really is accessible to us, although at the same time we need those little stories in order to activate what it means to truly lead a human life. And so I think I want to stop here briefly and see what you think about this example of natality. We are now entering a very interesting topic, and that is, she wrote 3 volumes on the life of the mind. The last volume was not finished because she certainly died of a heart attack, practically in the middle of it. But it was all originated with receiving, Hannah Arendt received an invitation to deliver the Gifford Lecture in Scotland. They have a variety of universities, I think 3 universities in Scotland, where these lectures are given. Many famous people have spoken there: Heisenberg, Whitehead, Charles Taylor, these sort of worldwide intellectuals. And when she received the invitation, she said yes, she would do it, and she actually did it for 2 years, 1973 and 1974. And she chose as a topic, that was a big surprise, the inner life of the mind. And when she was asked what she was characterizing as the inner life of the mind, she mentioned, number 1, thinking, number 2, willing, and number 3, judging. So I don't think it was quite clear to her, or maybe it was, but I haven't seen it proven anywhere, that when she chose these 3 basic activities of the inner life, that she actually chose the 3 books that Immanuel Kant published. The Critique of Pure Reason is all about thinking. The Critique of Practical Reasoning is all about willing. And the Critique of Judgment, it says it in the title, is about judging. So I find it kind of amusing until I realized that during these last years, she gave numerous courses at the New School, and the main course she repeatedly gave was courses on Immanuel Kant. So that solved a little bit for me. So, but now, what is happening in this kind of inner life? The first condition that she said is you have to withdraw from life. You have to withdraw. There is no such thing as thinking while you're involved in any of the basic activities that I pointed out. So it struck me as kind of peculiar that she asked about this withdrawal, because when she was younger, she had absolutely no sympathy for any kind of inner life. In fact, she said the inner life is whatever it is of no interest to me. What is of interest to me is actually action, etc. So there are two reasons why she chose the topic of thinking. So I'm starting out with thinking, and then go on to willing and judging. But there are two reasons why she chose thinking. The first one is kind of lame, in my opinion. I was kind of disappointed when she mentioned it. And it has to do with Eichmann. When she wrote that highly controversial Eichmann book, she characterized Eichmann as a thoughtless person, really. An empty bureaucratic machine, unable to really think even an inch outside the mechanism immediately before him. I already told you that I disagree with that kind of evaluation of Eichmann, but that's now beside the point. What is to the point is that she said, since she characterized Eichmann as a thoughtless person, shallow, she wanted to find out what she really thought about thinking. Well, if that is thoughtless, what is thinking? And she had this sort of doubt in her mind. She asked herself, can thinking be among conditions that make people abstain from doing evil? Or a condition, or conditions them against it? So that's a very interesting question that she asked. Thinking as a bulwark against evil. When you say people think about it, oh, don't think about it. Think about it. Thinking comes in as a kind of protector against doing evil or being leaning towards evil. And her second reason was that she said she was her whole life dedicated to the active life, action, natality, as we just analyzed it, until it dawned on her one day, more than any other day, that the people who actually introduced the distinction between vita activa and vita contemplativa were actually contemplatives. And she said, well, maybe I don't know enough what true contemplation really is. So those two reasons, one, the Eichmann reason to find out what thought really was, and the other one was, well, the people who make the important distinctions in our life are thinkers, contemplatives. So that really launched her on finding out what was meant by thinking. Now, how about that conflict that she said when she was younger in life? She didn't believe in the inner life at all. Well, guess what? She still doesn't. She has in mind by the inner life something totally different. You will not find in her thinking about thinking the name of Freud. You will not find psychoanalysis. You will not find psychotherapy. You will not find psychology. In other words, she is surprisingly totally true to herself by changing really what most people think by inner life. By inner life, most people think what's going on in my head and the emotions I have and the battles I have every day and all of that. No, she was not interested in that. Even now, as she was interested in the inner life, in thinking. So now the question becomes, what is thinking? And now we are entering in the complex text of Hannah Arendt, a really complex phase. And I'm going a little bit more slowly, so that I can bring out what the attraction is about thinking for her. It's something difficult to understand, actually. For her, thinking produces metaphorical language. That's quite a statement. I repeat, for Hannah Arendt, the biggest gift of thinking is the entire sphere of rhetoric and topological meanings, especially based in metaphor. Well, how is that possible? It is possible because she thinks of thinking, this kind of meta-thinking. She thinks of it as bridging the separation between that which is spirit in human beings and that which is spatio-temporally bounded by human beings. In other words, she thinks you cannot talk about something spiritual in spatio-temporal terms directly, because that would destroy totally the spiritual meaning. I give an example. If you want to talk about love, and you think you have, from thinking about love, a direct access to translating, umsetzen, to translate what love is into spatio-temporal realities, you are in for a surprise, because all you come out is trivialities and rules, etc. They won't do it. So this is sort of an example of showing that if you deal with spiritual reality and you think, the product is that you are coming up with the absolute necessity of using metaphor, no way out, and that the metaphor will be such that it is given to the sphere of the public in ways that they can then make use of it, and not the thinking person, but the acting person. So to illustrate this, Hannah Arendt referred to the myth of Orpheus. Orpheus and Eurydice. You may know the myth. There is known as the most talented music player in ancient Greece. Orpheus and Eurydice have a wonderful life until, unfortunately, one day Eurydice gets bitten by a snake and dies. And she enters Hades, and Orpheus' music collapses, and he wants to visit his spouse in the underworld, and he gets some special permissions. I don't know whom he bribed, but there is some bribing going on in the myth. The myth comes to you in 2-3 different versions. Virgil, there is Ovid has a version, and so on. But what is important here, that Hannah Arendt sees in the death of the spouse the withdrawal from the world. All right. The withdrawal from the world, which is necessary to think. It looks like, for the time of your thinking, you're dead to the world. So Orpheus goes and tries to get Eurydice back. And he actually gets the permission to take her back. But the attempt fails. Why does it fail? Because just as Orpheus is at the limit between Hades and the daylight reality of the Greeks, he doesn't hear her footsteps anymore, looks back, and she's gone forever. Hannah Arendt interprets the example in such a way that what Orpheus was trying to do, he was trying to translate spiritual matters directly into the daylight consciousness of everyday life, and it had to fail. What he was not aware of is that he needed metaphor to do that in order to be his own myth. So the interesting thing is that the myth in Hannah Arendt's illustration of thinking is the proof of the matter, because the lesson she wants to give us about thinking is inseparable from the use of metaphor. Actually, here in this case, the use of a myth in order to convey to us the deeper implication of what thinking really was. So I leave it at that. The book is the book on thinking is enormously, how should I say, setting a first in looking at the role of thinking. I have not, in my long career, and I have to say that, found a more profound analysis of metaphor is achieving on a necessary basis in order for human beings to be able to talk about spiritual matters in the first place. So I see our clock is sort of progressing. I want briefly to mention the two other activities. One is willing, by Hannah Arendt. The willing that she characterizes has nothing to do with being able to choose. I mean, she says, first of all, the willing was not known among the Greeks altogether, absolutely. Willing, free will was introduced by the Hebrew tradition, etc. We already talked about that. And the Garden of Eden has become paradigmatic of what it means to will or not to will, because this kind of the fall out of the garden was a crucial beginning that falls under the heading of natality. No, for her, willing is really a matter of the enactment of freedom itself. So what that means is willing concerns that which is not useful. So again, it's not the usual wishful thinking that you want. In addition, willing for Hannah Arendt is nothing that pertains to necessary structures. So again, the entire moral edifice of Kant on a practical reason is eliminated by that, because they need to do it. It's an imperative for Kant. For Hannah Arendt, it's entirely free, and it is a mental freedom. So willing, what it actually does, if it is performed in that kind of mental freedom, it creates a condition, a place for action to take place, but in such a way that it is not a causal relationship. Willing rather characterizes the character of a human being, namely that which the human being, you and I, do every day in terms of enacting our freedom for circumstances that might bind us in our present condition. There is no bigger pleasure to read that section in Hannah Arendt than to experience the joy of true freedom, the freedom to be free for itself and not functionally for something that needs to be done. So finally, a little word about judging. Now, as I mentioned, judging remained unfinished, the activity of judging. But again, here she has enough projections in other writings that sort of lets you reconstruct what she means by judging. First of all, she takes it from Kant's judgment of taste. So again, you realize, hey, this is no judgment that most people are familiar with, judging this is this, this is that, or making decisions of this. No, nothing to do with that. Again, she chooses as a model for judgment the judgment of taste, insofar as taste is not interested in any outcome of the judgment. As long as it's sort of a typically Kantian idea, as long as you're interested in taste, in a particular outcome, you're really screwing the whole system here. You have to be non-interested and see what happens in the harmony of your inner capacities, etc. So that leads Hannah Arendt to say, oh, that really fits me well, because judgment consists in subsuming the particular under the general. And what I do when I celebrate my freedom and look at people who did that, I take a particular individual and subsume it under a general rule. In other words, to give you an example, when it comes to, let's say, courage, I want to say something about courage. What I take Achilles from Homer and show it as an illumination of human existence, what we could mean by courage. Or let's say I'm interested in true goodness or beauty of the world. What I take an individual like Saint Francis of Assisi and show how his life sets a new beginning with regard to that particular celebration of the human freedom, to applaud the beauty of the universe without functional or other dependencies that you want to achieve anything. In other words, we have reached, again, the work of art as something that stands by itself. And we have just a few minutes now to solve the issue, who and what is Hannah Arendt? We have waited a long time. And she introduced that distinction. Actually, a number of authors use the same. You wouldn't believe how many people make that distinction between who and what. The whatness of a human existence is usually shareable with other people. And I would say that in the context of Hannah Arendt, the whatness would be that she was a political witness of freedom among equals in a political setting. That's sort of what she's mostly known for. Totally independent, really independent public witness of human freedom in this setting of whatever the setting of the politics allowed at that particular moment for her to do. It is more mysterious when it comes, so we have an answer, I think, well, at least my answer of who she was. But now, the who was Hannah Arendt? Now, that's much more difficult. First of all, she didn't believe that she knew who Hannah Arendt was. She said, and this is particularly revealing because, as you know from natality, that each human being has the potential, at least, to create a new beginning, etc. And certainly there is no shortness of new beginnings in Hannah Arendt. But she says, I have no idea who I am in my uniqueness. I do, however, trust the people I live with, that they come much closer to who I really am, and I think I would accept their judgment. So that's very typical for Hannah Arendt again, that she accepts that other people with whom I live, public way, together, exposed, they may know me better. They get a feel for my uniqueness better than I myself. And I'm now elevating myself to one of those people who have lived for some time with the works of Hannah Arendt, and as such, by her permission, I am eligible to issue a judgment of who I think she truly was. And I think her uniqueness comes out in the mystery of natality, the hope, the faith and hope that for her was the unexpected miracle that we always should expect as long as we are on this beautiful planet. And so, my dear friends, I have come to the conclusion of our Hannah Arendt. There are plenty of questions still possible, over a minute.
Well, there are, of course, numerous questions. When I think about Hannah Arendt, and in particular, as you mentioned, her distance or her, let's say, critical attitude towards psychology and all of these kind of disciplines, isn't that something that even prevails today? And wasn't she one of the influential people for, on the one hand, opening up new pathways for what is being called philosophical counseling?
Yes.
Of course, on the other hand, psychological counseling is the usual standard these days. But I know a lot of people, particularly philosophers who were, well, in parallel to me, writing their thesis in the early 80s or late 70s, who became what was called philosophische Lebensberater. I don't know whether anything like that exists in the US as well, but it's really the other side of the psychoanalyst.
Yes. Wonderfully put, and I think there are good jobs now available in that area. Actually, it's picking up the philosophical counseling, and it clearly appeals to people who are rendered uncomfortable with, psychological good or bad kind of theories, because they say, whatever is sort of coming out of these sort of psychological meanderings, etc. I'm interested, and you see them. I mean, they are usually so-called realists behind those philosophical counsellors. I mean, they are not dreamers. They also solve problems, and they solve problems of clients who come to them from all walks of life. And from where I am, I can see it only increase. Some of these jobs, I only have a few examples of somebody who had to fold his business because he ran out of clients. That's, of course, the risk of life. But that's a very interesting. What is it? A kind of a separation of temperament here, or I think interests and what you find helpful. It's a sort of the pragmatic element I like in what you say. I mean, if it helps you, whatever you're doing, do it. If it doesn't help you, you just let it at the wayside. But Hannah Arendt is typical protagonist of not being in sympathy with the mumbo jumbo, as she called it, of psychological reasoning. The evening is young, as they call it.
All the best.
Bye-bye. Bye. Have a great evening. Bye.